My presentation is on George W. Bush, and on September 11th, 2001, George Bush was just planning his normal day. He was planning to discuss education reform with a third grade class in Florida. And right before he walked into the classroom, one of his staff members informed him that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And he initially thought that it was a smaller plane that maybe just made a mistake in his flight path and hit the tower. But after that, he learned that it actually was a commercial airliner, and he was shocked by that. He thought that that had to be the worst pilot in the world to hit that tower, and so he found it odd, but he began to read to the class anyways. And as he was reading, his staff quietly informed him that another plane struck the towers, and Bush developed a deer in the headlights look on his face, and he was kind of shocked, but he kept reading. He was trying to think of an exit strategy so the kids in the class wouldn't get scared. And many people viewed his reaction as cowardly and indecisive because he didn't jump up and take action and leave the classroom right away. But he was putting the emotions of the children first, and he didn't worry about how the analysts perceived his initial response. Many people disliked George Bush when he was in office from 2000 to 2008, and many people still dislike him 6 years later. He wrote an autobiography called Decision Points, which discusses the decisions he made early in his life, as well as highlights the good and bad decisions that he made during his presidency. His moral philosophy seems to revolve around his family, religion, and the well-being of the United States. He begins the memoir by talking about events and decisions that occurred when he was growing up, and he discusses how his parents were heavy influences on the decisions that he made while he was young. And he had attended Andover Preparatory High School, which was on the East Coast, and he was living in Texas as a child, so he was kind of nervous to make the change from the South to the East Coast, but his parents really wanted him to go to Andover, this really strict high school, and so he went. And then he also attended Yale after high school due to another family tradition. And when he graduated from Yale, it was around the time when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and that influenced him to again follow in his father's footsteps, and he wanted to join the Air Force. So his father had a heavy influence on a lot of the paths that he chose in his life, but his mother had an influence on his personality. He talked about how he knew how to provoke his mom because they had similar personalities, and one of the major similarities they had was their temper. So he knew how to push her buttons and make her mad. But even though his parents had high expectations for him to succeed, they never pushed him to follow a particular career path. They urged him to succeed in school in order for him to have the career of his choice as an adult and to have a successful life. As for relationships, Bush had honest and loving relationships with his parents, his wife, and his daughters. He always tried to give a lot of his energy to developing and maintaining his relationships. And as for his relationships with his colleagues and the American people, he tried to gain their trust by giving and not taking. An example he used that occurred on the morning of 9/11, when Bush was advised by his vice president and other members of his staff to avoid Washington due to safety precautions. But Bush initially took their orders, but he wasn't happy about it. He didn't feel as though the country would be able to trust him and count on him and feel that he was a good leader if he was giving speeches from an Air Force base or a safe haven in a basement in Oklahoma. He wanted to keep the American people informed from Washington, to let them know that he was in it with them, and he and his staff were going to try and figure out what was going on. And one theory that we discussed in class that Bush explicitly applied in his life was similar to the divine command theory. And while Bush doesn't act solely upon God's will, he did apply this theory when he was making his decision to quit drinking. He realized that he had developed a bad habit, and he began to question his habitual personality. He asked himself a question, whether he had an issue, and the question was, could I continue to grow closer to the Almighty, or was alcohol becoming my God? So he felt that alcohol was controlling his life and controlling the decisions he was making and other things like that. And he had a difficult time making the change until he had a joint birthday party with his wife, Laura, in 1986. It was his 40th birthday party. And he had made a fool of himself that evening after having too much to drink. And the next morning, he had made a decision to quit drinking. He felt as though faith could show him a way out of his issue and that the grace of God would help him change. And he believed that religion helped him to develop a new habit in not drinking and being more religious. And he feels that without that change in his life, he wouldn't have accomplished what he has today. Another concept that we discussed in class that was displayed in Bush's book was phronesis and courage. Bush's decision-making before and after Hurricane Katrina mimicked the example discussed in class regarding the 3 women who were deciding how to save the baby that falls off the bridge. Courage occurs when someone knows what decision to make, when and how to make that decision. And Bush felt that he had failed the city of New Orleans because he felt that he should have recognized that Louisiana's government deficiencies, or their government was having deficiencies. He should have recognized that sooner, and he should have intervened faster. And he feels that he didn't make the wrong decisions, but he took too long to decide on the appropriate action to take. And that sort of falls in line with the second woman who was trying to figure out how to help the drowning child, but she just took too long to make the right decision. And Bush's lack of courage to make the decision correctly and in a timely manner affected many more people than he could have even anticipated. And during Bush's time as president, he faced many morally significant issues. Some of those difficult issues included deciding how to respond during and after the 9/11 attacks, whether to go to war with Iraq, and decisions regarding Afghanistan. In deciding right and wrong, most of his decisions during his presidency revolved around keeping America safe and creating the greatest good for the greatest number of people. As for his decisions during 9/11, he had to decide how to keep America calm while still informing the people that justice would be served. A right versus right dilemma that occurred and it happened the morning of the 9/11 attacks. Bush had to decide what to do if planes that were flying in or near the United States were unresponsive, and he told his vice president to make contact with suspicious planes, and if they wouldn't respond, the vice president was ordered to have them shot down. And the decision to shoot a plane down would affect those members on the plane, but it would save many others from a devastating crash into a more populated area. And his decision was made to protect more people rather than to save a few. And he had made the decision based on his rights as the commander-in-chief, even though it may not have been a morally correct decision. Another difficult decision that Bush had to make was whether to go to war against Iraq. And in making this decision, he checked his authority in calling such a war. He used the Article 2 of the Constitution, which allows the president as the commander-in-chief to call for war. And he also used Congress to help him make the decision. And he states in his book, by a vote of 98-0 in the Senate and 420-1 in the House, Congress declared that the decision to go to war was the decision that would prevent further attacks on the country. Bush felt that this decision would be the best one to keep America safe, and he was backed by nearly his entire government when he was making the decision. Another difficult decision that Bush had to make was his decision regarding Afghanistan. This decision also pertained to war, as it was another component of deciding whether or not to go to war. If they wanted to defend the country, they needed to disband and dismantle the Al-Qaeda terrorist group and the Taliban regime, which was in Afghanistan. And Bush decided that removing the al-Qaeda's safe haven in Afghanistan was essential to protecting the country, and his decision was made out of self-defense, not revenge or any other aspect, and it was important for the plan to be implemented to protect the country. And the important lessons that Bush learned in his life pertain to his personal issues, his family, and to his professional and political career. With himself, he learned that the decision to quit drinking allowed him to spend more time with his family, and it helped him maneuver through his political endeavors without alcohol as a constraint. And with his family, he learned that they would support him through his highest moments and his downfalls. And with his professional and political career, he learned that it was impossible to make the right decision every single time, but that it was very important for him to learn from the mistakes he made and to implement the proper action the next time. And it was his life experiences with his family, religion, and his difficult decisions in the White House that helped shape his moral development. In each of those aspects, he learned from his mistakes while trying to make the decisions that were in the best interest of the American people. And his moral development shaped his life through learning from his mistakes throughout his personal life and his presidency. Bush was very proud to serve the country that he loves, and his views on how he wanted the world to be were reflected in his presidency. He wanted other people to view him as a president who trusted people to make the right choices in their lives, and who kept his vow to keep America safe, and who used America's influence to advance freedom for the country. More importantly, he hopes for the world that our country will remain in a high power, and that future politicians, as well as citizens of the United States, will love the country and put as much energy and effort into it as much as he did.